Hi, everybody. Eve Harow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. It has rolled somehow into March 1st, 2021, the 17th day of Adar, 5781. I hope wherever you were, if you celebrated Purim, it was a joyous one. And that what we say on Purim, the whole story of Purim is v'nahafochu. Like things should not be what they seem and things should turn around. So maybe it'll be the beginning of new times and good times for those of us around the world. And I am so honored to have with me tonight, Elan, because I'm broadcasting from Jerusalem on Monday night. We're taping this on Monday night in Jerusalem for broadcast on Tuesday. Elan Carr, who just recently stepped down as special envoy to the White House to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, and today is on the advisory board of the Combat Anti-Semitism movement. And I imagine quite busy because there's a lot of that going around. And so, Elan, thank you so much for joining me here on Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. I am sure that my listeners are thrilled.
It is an honor and a pleasure, Eve, to be with you. Thank you for having me, and to the great audience of the Land of Israel Network. Hello, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, well, you're still in Los Angeles? Former Angelino or Angelino? My old stomping grounds.
I am. I'm actually a New Yorker. I'm one of those many transplanted New Yorkers, but I've lived in LA for many years, and my family's in LA. My wife is actually a native of LA.
Oh, so as my husband is. Very nice. Yeah. Okay, good. But I've been out of there for a long time.
Yeah, I think we have some friends in common.
I'm sure we do. We played the Jewish geography, but I really want my listeners to hear about what first of all, was the position created for you? Was there a position of envoy to combat anti-Semitism before the last administration, or was this created for you?
Yes, actually there was I had predecessors. This position was created through bipartisan support of Congress. In 2004. And, it says a lot about the philo-Semitism of the United States, that the United States created a position, a senior administration position devoted to fighting anti-Semitism throughout the world and protecting the Jewish people. It's something that I think, should make all Americans deeply proud. And so this was created in 2004. The first envoy was appointed by President Bush in 2006, Greg Rickman. President Obama had two. Actually, I'm good friends with my predecessor, Ira Foreman, who was President Obama's second envoy. And then I was President Trump and Secretary Pompeo's appointee for this position. And it just was a tremendous privilege to serve my country in a substantial way, and to be charged with fighting this ancient and yet tireless human sickness that is anti-Semitism, that we see recurring generation after generation all over the world. And to be the lead diplomat for the United States of America, and to lead America's fight against Jew hatred everywhere in the world, boy, that was just a tremendous privilege and honor. And I'm very proud of what we got done.
If someone stepped into your shoes, is this new administration going to continue with the position?
Yes. Well, they have to. It's statutory, but
it is.
Yes,
okay.
They have not. Yes, they have not appointed anyone yet.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Congress elevated. I was very flattered that Congress voted to give the office the rank of ambassador, and so my successor will have to go through Senate confirmation. So it'll actually take a little bit longer because of the Senate confirmation process, but I imagine the administration will get around to filling it quite soon.
Right, and there's a need. Like as you said, it's the oldest hatred, and it seems to be this really cool hatred that morphs no matter what is going on. So you had blood libels, and you had whatever, and all these different forms of anti-Semitism over the centuries and even millennia, and now we have Corona-based anti-Semitism, and all these kinds of speculations and theories. I mean, like, what's the latest that you're dealing with right now? What's the hot off the press reason for anti-Semitism as we speak?
Yeah, we often refer to this term, well, this is the new anti-Semitism. So first it was, of course, anti-Zionism and Israel hatred. That was the new anti-Semitism. Now it's, blaming Jews for having invented the coronavirus, or intentionally spreading it, or using it as a tool of global control or profit. And that's the new, the internet-based Zoom world anti-Semitism. But, the truth is, Eve, these are maybe new flavors, but there is nothing new. There's nothing new about this. I mean, targeting Israel as the Jewish collective, nothing new. What's new is that there is a state of Israel, but putting in the crosshairs the Jewish community, whether it's the Jewish community next door or the Jewish community in the world, that is as old as anti-Semitism itself. By the way, BDS, economic boycotts of Jews, my goodness, that's medieval. And certainly, we all have seen the pictures of the brown shirts, kauft nicht bei Juden, standing in front of shops. Well, that's BDS. Don't buy from the Jews. And so there's nothing new about BDS. There's nothing new about economic boycotts. And there's also nothing new about blaming Jews for pandemics. Jews were blamed for the Black Death in Europe. And great violence, by the way, was done to Jews because of this idea of Jews poisoning wells. Of course, it's all baseless. It's all idiotic. But it's real in the sense of the enormous toll on Jewish safety, on Jewish life, on Jewish health that these awful calumnies impose. And that's why it is so important we double down on this fight against this global scourge. And you're right, when the world went online, when this pandemic swept over us, this awful sickness, the world went online. Well, the anti-Semites went online, and we saw this incredible increase in the volume of online anti-Semitism. That's why I was very proud that my team and I at the State Department, with Secretary Pompeo hosting and convening, we put on the first ever U.S. government-sponsored conference addressing online hate, specifically anti-Semitism on the internet and social media, which is such a driver. It's a vector for this. And it's been exacerbated, of course, during the pandemic. But the truth is, Eve, I'm often asked, why is anti-Semitism rising? It's been rising for over a decade now.
Right.
Well, it's been rising. It tracks almost precisely the increase in our lives of the internet and social media. As this has gone up, so too has anti-Semitism gone up. Because for all the good and the tremendous good that that social media and the internet has done for us and has given us in our lives, it's also the chief vector of so many human sicknesses, including anti-Semitism.
It seems also that in the past few years, there's been an interesting convergence of the radical left and the radical right, who have really nothing to do with each other, except that they seem to meet at this common place of both hating Jews for their own reasons. Right. Where do you think that comes from? Does that stem from some of the polarization that we see in general in the political atmosphere?
That's a great question.
Or from something else, a little more insidious, or can you pinpoint? I mean, you're the expert, so I really want to hear from you.
Yeah, it's a great question. You really touched on the nerve. First of all, let me say that there's also a third wing of it's the unholy triumvirate of anti-Semitism. The third is militant Islam.
Right.
And when you think about it, the far right, which is really associated with ethnic supremacism, the idea that everyone is inferior to their own, ethnic, however that is defined, their ethnicity. That's associated with the far right, the neo-Nazi types. The radical left, usually focusing on Zionism, Jewish peoplehood in Israel, not exclusively, but often. And then militant Islam is the third source. Now, think, Eva, you asked this great question. What in the world do these three ideological camps have in common? I mean, the far right and the far left, militant Islam, I mean, you would think these three camps would hate each other more than they hate anything else on earth. And yet they are united by their hatred of Jews. And so why is that? You asked the great question. How is that possible? I would argue that it is exhibit A in the evidence of anti-Semitism being at its core, beneath everything else, a spiritual sickness. When you look throughout history to those movements that are movements of destruction, movements of rage, movements of tearing down heritage, not to make the world better, but just to reject movements of hatred, of rage, of rejection, of anger. Almost every single one of them was anti-Semitic, and not anti-Semitic as a footnote, and not anti-Semitic as an afterthought, but many of them had anti-Semitism as a core defining feature of the ideology, as we see in the far right, and as we see in militant Islam, and as we see in the radical left when it comes to Israel. I mean, it's almost a litmus test for belonging to the radical left is hatred of Israel.
Right.
And so this is what you see when a movement is one of real of a movement that is based on anger and hatred. You can put your money down that they're going to hate Jews. And you say, that these two camps are very different. They are very different ideologically, but what we're seeing now in the right and the left, when I say two camps now, I'm talking about right and the left, we see the right and the left sometimes working together. I was shocked as special envoy to discover that on US college campuses, which is the front line of the radical left type of anti-Semitism, these Jewish students are besieged on some of the best universities in the world. It's appalling.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're seeing far right activists move into the campus space. Now you might think campus, the radical left, how could a fascist find a home on campus? Well, it turns out that when these far right ethnic supremacist type activists confine their rhetoric to the terms of the left, namely they talk about Israel and Zionism, which usually is not the language of the right, but when they use that kind of rhetoric, suddenly they're given, let's call it a safe space, mm-hmm. where they can spout their venom unmolested. And the left is very willing to tolerate neo-Nazis on campus when they talk the language of the left. And so you're seeing now a very, very disturbing cooperation at times of not by intent often, but in fact, de facto cooperation between these two camps. And it's really a disgrace. And it's why we have to unite in fighting this, providing really a united front against this great evil.
Where's their funding coming from?
Oh, all over. Well, some of them are not funded. Some of them are not funded. I mean, some are
grassroots.
Yeah, some are grassroots, some are lone wolves, some are, they're in, vile, venomous internet chat rooms where they feed off of the hate for years and are radicalized. But there is funding. When you're talking about the far left activists, the Israel hating network is very often linked and very often funded, and a lot of that funding is foreign. We're seeing all kinds of links between these BDS and Israel hating networks, and there is definitely money there. So look, it's but either way, whether they're well funded or whether these are grassroots internet chat room buddies, they're a big threat. I mean, look, some of these lone shooters, the far right, synagogue shooters and mass murderers who snap, after feeding off of hate on the internet for years, they snap and they go kill people. There's no funding there very often, but but they're obviously deeply, deeply dangerous. So we have to confront all of it. And that's really the message, Eve. If there was one core message that I hammered home everywhere in the world for the 2 years I was on the job, it's we have three ideological sources of Jew hatred, and we have to confront all of it. To minimize any of it is to allow this cancer to metastasize. So if we're serious about fighting Jew hatred, you fight all of it, the far right, the radical left, militant Islam. And what I would say to audiences is, who cares what ideological clothing it wears? Jew hatred is Jew hatred, and it is evil, and we've got to confront it.
It's interesting because many of my listeners are Christian, pro-Israel Christians, who write to me. Some I've guided here when they come to Israel. Very frank conversations, of course, about the anti-Semitism that was in the church that might still be, but certainly isn't the way it was when you had the Inquisitions and the Crusades, and really, especially Catholicism, fighting Jews the way the Islamic fanatics are today, the jihadists are today. And to a great degree, thank God, that has been again, there might be rhetoric there might be anti-Jewish feeling in the religious sphere, as religions will do, but you certainly don't have the manifestations as you had in the terrible ways that Jews were killed over the years. So it can be changed. You know, when I look back and I see the very devastating history, and again, have very frank talks with people about that, because that's really the only way of realizing what happened and what the process was, is to have the frank talks. Something did change, maybe, I think, I hope, within that world. So, can that give us hope that this is not inevitable, that something can be done here?
Question about it. There's no question about it. And I think what you said is so deeply important. You know, if we weren't able to change this, I wouldn't have taken the job. I mean, you know, I took my having done this is evidence of my optimism. I do believe. I think we've got to be creative. It's not only the same old, well, you know, we'll issue a condemnation. You really want to roll this back. You've got to talk about values. You've got to talk about philo-Semitism. You've got to really be creative. You've got to address the issue of the internet and hate online, not just anti-Semitism, but all brands of hate online. So you've got to be creative, but there's no question it can be rolled back. And what you talked about is absolutely powerful evidence. The Catholic Church has moved dramatically from where it was in medieval days, or even you know, in the Renaissance often, to where it is today. Dramatic change. And the Christian evangelical movement, my goodness, I mean, for evangelical Christians, in almost all cases, being philo-Semitic, not just pro-Israel, but philo-Semitic, is a litmus test for belonging. I mean, it is a core theological tenet of the evangelical Christian movement, certainly in the United States, and more so in Latin America. I'm very proud to be participating in a series of programs in Latin America addressed to the blooming evangelical Christian community. What's happening in Latin America with these evangelical Christians are embracing Judeo-Christian heritage. They're pro-Western, they're pro-Israel. I mean, it's really amazing. And as envoy, I was honored to partner with them, a great group called Latino Coalition for Israel, and we're doing all kinds of programs. And now, as a private citizen, I'm actually less constrained to be doing these things. So I'll be going to Latin America soon, speaking at a major event in Guatemala and other things. And so this is really, really important. Now, but I do want to point out, though, that it's not all rosy. Let's look at some of the mainline Protestant churches that have really embraced a deep hostility to Jewish people, maybe not to Judaism as a religion, but to an inseparable part of Jewish identity, which is Jewish nationhood, Jewish peoplehood. And the Jewish people's indelible, inextricable connection to the land of Israel. Several of the mainline Protestant churches have evinced a deep hostility to them, and it's very disturbing. So we have to celebrate the gains we've made, but we also have to focus on making the world a better place. And now, on that score, Eve, let's look at the Middle East and what's happening. You want an example of how things can change for the better, and how philo-Semitism can replace anti-Semitism? Just look at what our administration was able to do. I mean, President Trump and the peace team and Secretary Pompeo,
the Abraham Accords,
what they were able to do with the Abraham Accords. I mean, breathtaking transformation, in the heart of the Arab world. And I couldn't be more excited about the potential we have in that part of the world to really create real affection between peoples. It's stunning.
You know, it seems to me that if somebody knows the Bible, or what some people will call the Old Testament, that they are more understanding of Jews. I mean, that, to go back, you know, like Catholics really don't know the Bible. I've actually been quite surprised on the occasions where I've guided Catholics. It's like everything starts kind of in the middle of the story. But when you go into the Bible and you really see the very painful history of the Jewish people, I mean, and it's not an easy read. It's not just like, oh, we were wonderful and we did this and we were fabulous.
Oh.
I mean, some of the stories in the Bible are like, really? Why did they think they should write that down? It's made us look terrible. Okay. But it's obviously the message is that people are not perfect. And if you need to believe in God and you need to always be working on yourself, both as individuals and as a people and vis-a-vis other people and, other humanity. And it's an incredibly powerful book. And I've seen that if you understand the Bible, and many of my listeners are very, even more than I am, very into the Bible, then there's a different sense. But yeah, with the Abraham Accords, I mean, we're seeing that here because we source out of that same man and the same, in the same Middle East, which I would say, and I'm asking you this as someone, as an American who was the envoy for the White House. Do you think that Westerners, meaning Americans, Europeans, South Americans, Australians, understand enough the difference in mentality between the Middle East and the West, that it's not, there's the honor, the shame, some of these even biblical precepts, we could say, these more old-fashioned, these deep-seated, these tribal elements, if you will, that you really don't have in the West, for good and for bad, because you can make the case on it's a great thing, and you can make a case that it's not such a great thing to hold a grudge for 1,500 years either. But how do you see that? Because you, and now I'm going to lead into something else, an American war veteran, served in Iraq. I'd like to talk about that for a few minutes in a minute when you answer this question, if you can. Do you have an understanding as an envoy who's back and forth and need to maybe somehow parse that into what you do in English for the Western world?
I think that I've seen over the years, and obviously there's variations. I mean, the United States isn't monolithic,
right?
But
not at all.
I have seen a lack of understanding on the part of some about the Middle East, the Arab world, and how things work. And you mentioned Iraq. I mean, I saw this very well in Iraq when I served there as a U.S. Army officer, and some of many of the decisions were excellent, but some of the decisions I shook my head, and I, even while I was there, I approached senior people and policymakers, and I said, sir or ma'am, this will not get us good results. I know this region, and I know the region because not only did I serve there, but I'm an Iraqi Jew. I mean, my mother is a refugee from Iraq. The Baghdadi, the Babylonian Jewish community is the oldest diaspora Jewish community on earth.
Right.
And my family and my ancestors were in Iraq for 2,500 years before
the exile, the first temple being destroyed, that original exile, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So it was. So by the way, when I actually arranged a military mission while I was there to look at the ancient city of Babylon and actually go to Nebuchadnezzar's palace, the emperor who had taken my ancestors into captivity. It was very powerful. It was a very powerful moment.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like.
Really, it's interesting. Middle Eastern Jews, Iraqi Jews, and Jews of the region, Syrian, Egyptian Jews, we understand that there's good and there's bad in the history of Arab Jewish relations and of the relations between Islam and Judaism. It was a flourishing community for thousands of years.
Right.
A community where the first yeshivot on earth were in what is today in Iraq. Of course, the Talmud was written in what is today Iraq. And so it was a really flourishing community. Maimonides, of course, was in Egypt. I mean, but then the anti-Semitism was appalling. My grandfather was arrested and thrown in prison. My mother watched him get dragged out of the house. He still had shaving cream on his face. She remembers it was in the morning. They took him away. He was thrown in prison for no reason other than he was a Jew. And so we know that there's great good in the history and also real bad. And that is hopeful because look, there's bad in the world. We know that. The question is, can we get to the good? And the Abraham Accords are a perfect example. Let me tell you a story. I was at the White House for the signing of the Abraham Accords. Wow. And a senior delegate of one of the Arab countries, I don't want to say names and who, but ran up to me, and he was bouncing off the walls. He was exuberant, and he said to me, I'll never forget this. He said, "Don't think this is going to be a cold peace. This is not going to be a cold peace. We will do great things together." And he was so happy to be embracing the state of Israel and the Jewish people. After that, I got choked up. I said, I can't, you have to pinch yourself. You can't believe you're seeing this.
Right.
And so really, we're seeing the world change in so many ways. Yes, anti-Semitism has been rising for over a decade now, and it's bad, and we've got to fight it. But we also see such remarkable changes, and not only in the Middle East. I mean, we're seeing leaders take on this fight in Europe, and great things happening. When you had an anti-Semitic cabal take over the UK Labour Party,
right.
The whole world, the Jews of Britain said, our community's done. We're finished. We're going to have to leave. And what happened? They got shellacked in the election, and what was an amazing victory, Eve, is that in exit polls, ordinary Brits, many of them said that anti-Semitism in the Labour Party is one of the reasons why they voted Tory. They said, this is embarrassing for our country. This is not the kind of country we want for our kids. Do you know what a win that is? Do you know what a tremendous victory that is for the fight against anti-Semitism? And so, we've got to, it's not all bad, and we have to really appreciate how breathtaking the good news has been. And also along those lines is what President Trump and Secretary Pompeo and the whole team, and Vice President Pence and the whole leadership team, what we have done for the Jewish people in Israel. I mean, uncompromising support of the Jewish people in Israel and fighting anti-Semitism the world over. It's really an inspiration. And so there's a lot of good news. We have to remember there's a lot of good news.
Right. And it seems like in the years that you were envoy, you made a lot of connections that you haven't dropped, that you're continuing, and that the former administration is also continuing certain members, that this is something that they realize is too big to just say, okay, well, that had to do with the tenure of this administration and now we're done. Look, we all know that what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. So this isn't real. Fighting anti-Semitism is not just saying, well, my accountant's Jewish, he's a nice guy, so I don't believe in anti-Semitism. It's much, much bigger than that. It's an evil that's unleashed. It hits everybody eventually.
What I said before, when you asked why is the far right, the radical left united in this, and I talked about these destructive movements. Anti-Semitism is a threat to the core values on which our countries were based, on which the United States was created, on which the West was built. People who love freedom and cherish the godliness of the human soul are threatened by anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism directly opposes these basic tenets of the West, which is why, Eve, when you look at those movements that define themselves through anti-Semitism, for which anti-Semitism is a core defining feature, these movements have brought destruction not only on Jews, on the earth. I mean, the devastation visited upon humanity by anti-Semitic movements. Obviously, Nazi Germany is Exhibit A, which not only murdered 6 million plus Jews, but left a continent in ruins. But let's fast forward to today. Which movements today define themselves through anti-Semitism? ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, the Islamic Republic of Iran. These entities are threats not only to Jews, certainly to Jews. These entities are threats to the world, to civilization, to peace, to freedom. And so there's just we come back to this principle. You want to make the world a better place. You want to reduce human suffering. You want to elevate the human condition. This fight has got to be one of the first fights. This is where you go because again, anti-Semitism is a core evil. That's why President Trump, whenever he talked about anti-Semitism, he always called it the vile poison of anti-Semitism, because it really is. It's every society in history that has imbibed the vile poison has been destroyed by it. It's rotted.
Communism,
communism,
classic example of that as well. So you talked about the campuses, which for many of us we've known are just so not what they're supposed to be, not the safe spaces of thinking and intellectual, conversations. You have to be so careful these days. So I know that you've been involved with API, which is the Jewish fraternity, the International Jewish Fraternity. My son is very involved in the Jerusalem, so I hear about this a lot.
Your son is the president of our chapter at Hebrew U. So
exactly. Exactly, because otherwise, like, why would I be talking about fraternities? Those days are long gone.
Well, actually, I'll tell you, there is a deeply important role for the empowerment of Jewish, and not just Jewish, but students of goodwill to stand together to fight anti-Semitism. API is the International Jewish Fraternity. Has done that. I was the international president of API, and I been involved in for 30 years. No. And so I know how bad it is on campuses. I know what's going on where kids are marginalized and harassed and discriminated against and subjected to real they're really not allowed to live.
They're intimidated, and their parents or they are paying $75,000 a year for the privilege, which is
right, and it's not acceptable.
Interesting.
It's absolutely unacceptable. And as interestingly enough, Eve, as special envoy, I heard from Jewish student leaders in Europe the same thing I've been hearing from Jewish student leaders for decades in my AEPI work, and that is that if you want to be safe as a Jewish student, you've got to divorce yourself entirely from any sense of Jewish peoplehood, from Zionism, from connection to Israel. That's the price you pay for physical safety. Well, there's a word for that. It's called anti-Semitism. To say you want to be safe as a Jew, you've got to cut out of your heart and soul a key aspect of Jewish identity. That is anti-Semitism. And that's why in December of 2019, President Trump signed an historic executive order protecting Jewish students on campus. And he said, and basically this executive order said, enough is enough. We're not going to stand idly by and watch this happen. We are going to protect American kids on campus because Jewish students have every right to express their identity proudly without any fear. And I hope, look, President Trump, I'm so proud that our administration got that done and issued that executive order. But there should be nothing partisan about this.
I was going to say that.
I would hope that every administration and every president would support that executive order because protecting Jewish students who want to express their identity proudly and openly that's what America is all about.
Right.
And so I would hope that this is a bipartisan issue, and I would hope that every single president, every administration fights to protect Jewish students and to make sure this disgraceful wave of anti-Semitism on U.S. and international college campuses is pushed back.
So on a very practical level, someone's listening to this, their kids are at college, or they're seeing something going on in their synagogue or near their church, or something that's not sitting well with them. How do they get in touch with you? What can they do? Is there an organization they can join? Is there information they can get? How do people push back? Because, I've been reading of more than a few people now, some of whom I respect, some whom I respect a little bit less, who are saying, there's no point to fighting anti-Semitism. Anybody who believes that, there's just nothing to do with them. And my thinking is that maybe the anti-Semite himself, there's nothing to do with him. He's so riddled with hatred that, you can't get there. But the people that are being influenced by the garbage that they're putting out, that has to be stopped. You can't just ignore this. So what would you say on a practical level? Someone's listening and they want to get involved, or it's hitting them home personally, or they don't even know, like maybe just listening, they're like, whoa, I didn't even realize that was anti-Semitic, but I just saw that Saturday Night Live show, or whatever those little comments are that just keep getting dropped now without people so much thinking about them, like it's supposed to be funny. What can they do?
Well, there are so many organizations that are doing incredible things.
Any you could recommend specifically?
Sure. I mean, if you're talking about university campuses, I mean, my goodness, Stand With Us and there are a number of evangelical Christian groups that are doing great work. There is, of course, Jewish groups, Hasbara fellowships,
Right.
Eshet Torah, Chabad on campus, AEPI, just tremendous. And then, of course, in the world generally, I mean, the Simon Wiesenthal Center is a go-to address. The ADL, the AJC. I mean, these are organizations that are making a global, B'nai B'rith, BBI, global impact organizations. There are so many that one could get involved with, and I encourage everyone who wants to fight this scourge to do that. Now, in terms of me, you said, how can they get in touch with me? I'm happy to, you know, I will remain very active in this space. As I said, I'm going to be visiting in Latin America soon and doing a big event there. I'm keynoting an event in Latin America. I do, you know, I'm speaking on Zoom all the time, not just media interviews, but we're doing events on Zoom because it's so important that we stay engaged on these issues. Anti-Semitism, U.S. leadership in the world, U.S. foreign policy, how it's so important that U.S. leadership in the world be values-based. You know, all of these issues, and I speak all the time on Zoom. So anyone interested in contacting me should absolutely do so. Rachel,
sure,
at moreconnected.com. So Rachel, RACHEL at moreconnected, MOORE connected, no spaces.com.
Or they could be in touch with me and I'll pass them on.
Or get in touch with you. And and I would be happy to headline an event, because I think it's just so important that we first of all make sure everyone understands the nature of the threat. Second of all, that everyone understands that this is absolutely surmountable. We absolutely can win this fight. Again, I wouldn't have taken the job if I didn't believe that. And third of all, they have to know how and what they can do to really, you know, to really change history in this way. Because if you roll back the scourge, you're really not just, again, it's not just about the Jewish people, like you said, Eve. This is really about civilization and the kind of world our children and our grandchildren will inherit. And so this is a transformative change by rolling back this hatred, and to give people a sense of what they can do to do that is very, very important. So I look forward to working with you, Eve, and your great audience to do just that.
Well, I think these days a lot of people are suffering from helplessness. You know, if we feel like we can't go where we used to go, we can't see who we used to see, we can't travel. There's this, you know, disease out there that's dangerous for so many people, and not everybody's vaccinated. So, but the internet is a way, as you said before, of disseminating terrible things, but also of connecting good people, and perhaps using that access, which everybody has, in order to put this down. So maybe when we leave our homes and we really get out there, the world will be a better place than it was before we got locked down. I mean, maybe that's something that we can do. Every individual's got a keyboard, has a mouth, and can, you know, and can try and fight this, because it's not just about me or about you. It's about everybody.
Well, you know, Eve, you're 100% right. And the holiday of Lag BaOmer is a holiday with historical precedent. That's when plagues end. And so it's always dangerous to make predictions, but I say keep an eye on Lag BaOmer.
Interesting.
And this plague will end, and people will emerge from their homes, and life will start to return to normal. And I'm very excited to see that happen.
I hope so. Even just to get a handle on it, because it could be that this particular plague isn't going away, but it needs to be managed. If I've got to get a booster shot every 6 months, I'll get a booster shot every 6 months.
Well, right. Plagues end. A plague ending doesn't mean that there are no more viruses. A plague ending means that we can live and we can conduct our lives normally, and cities can get back to their magic. You know, I mentioned I'm a transplanted New Yorker, and and there, you know, there is no urban area like New York, you know, in terms of the crush of people and the magic of it, and the electricity of it, and so we've got to get our cities and our people back to the good old days.
And I mean, maybe really that's, you know, an analogy to anti-Semitism. It may never go away completely, but it has to be managed, and it has to be put in its place so that it doesn't kill people and doesn't hurt people. And as any plague is dealt with.
It is a plague. It is a disease. It has vectors. It has points of transmission. I mean, the analogy really is.
It has mutations. Yeah, absolutely.
It's very apt. And look, just like a plague, a pandemic, an epidemic can be contained, so too this can be contained and rolled back. And rolling it back means bringing health to humanity, right?
Yeah,
There
and
really
working
is
very
a matter
hard
of-
though, and working very
matter of
hard and
health.
cooperating. Yeah, absolutely. Elan Carr, thank you so much for
Thank
everything
you.
you've done, for everything that I know that you continue to do. And I hope that my listeners get in touch with you and you can't just ignore evil when it's out there,
No.
because then
God
you're
forbid.
part of it. No sitting on the fence anymore. So, and unfortunately, you mentioned all these organizations. There's so many organizations, yet anti-Semitism is still blooming. And so we just have to combat it any way we can, and be an army against it. So Elan Carr, thank you so much, former Special Envoy to the White House, combating anti-Semitism, and still right out there doing it around the globe. So I appreciate your time and everything that you've done, and I know we'll continue to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me on Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Okay, everybody, that is it for this week. Thank you for listening. You can always be in touch with me, Eve at thelandofisrael.com. And I hope that wherever you are well, and we're all getting through this together. Take care, everybody. Goodbye for now.